Honesty. Tim Brando, Fox Sports, joins us, our great friend on 365 Sports. Well, Tim, Colorado last week, and it might be 1, 2, or 3 more maybe this week with the Big 12 and the Arizona schools, huh?
Looks that way, and this is really playing out, David, the way we thought it might, and we detailed months ago here on your show, and the Washington Oregon thing potentially with the Big Ten. When I saw that report came out yesterday, earlier in the day, I thought, okay, well, now people are talking because the presidents of these schools clearly in contact one another with their own survival. They're talking to one another to make sure that they can cover their financial nuts for the long-term future, beyond this season. When you're in charge, and these athletic directors are financially, along with the presidents of the universities, and you know that you're now 12 months out from not knowing how much money you're going to be getting and where you can expect that money to be coming from, then you get, you're getting panicky. And that's what's bringing all this on. And just about every time we've seen realignment, the air of panic has been there for a number of schools in the aftermath of progressive moves being made by other schools and other conferences. So, yeah, I mean, this is pretty much the way we laid it out.
Tim, you had talked, especially we talked at length last week when you were on the show about the way that the Big 12 schools or ACC, SEC, even Big 10 approach athletics compared to quite a few of the Pac-12 schools, and that it is just not that big a deal. And I think that we've kind of seen that play out from at least the top of this executive committee and the presidents, in that there are some schools that got a harsh dose of reality about how little they were worth because they just assumed that it wasn't as big a deal and things would happen the right way for them, didn't they?
Well, I think what they're finding out, and for all the criticism of USC through the years, and especially in the aftermath of some coaching firings that have taken place before Lincoln Riley got there, the grim reality for even programs like Oregon and like Washington that have in the last handful of years, really the last decade, have been more successful than USC in terms of winning championships and, having opportunities in the college football playoff. Oregon and Washington have both gone. Oregon got to the finals in the first year of the CFP, and Washington's been in there twice. So when you look at it from that perspective, they'd like to think that they are on par with USC, and the truth is they never have been. USC has been carrying the water for that league for a long time, and especially from a television standpoint. They outrate every other school by a large margin. And I don't know that any of their leadership really took a long look at that. Washington is the second highest rated school in the Pac-12. Oregon is the third. There was a period when Oregon was ahead of Washington in the days of Marcus Mariota in the mid-2000s. Teams in 2014 and 15, that during that period. But USC, whether they are good or bad, are going to get the biggest games in the best time slots because more eyeballs come to those games. Now, they haven't done much with it. The Trojans have not been terribly successful. I mean, they are, in a lot of ways, the West Coast version of Texas, more brand than brawn. But the truth is, USC kind of knew where they were, and their credit, they decided to maximize financially their position, and the Big Ten was ready to go, and UCLA was fortunate to be in the same market, so they could hitch their wagon to them. And UCLA, I think, is probably the 5th highest rated team. They're not, they're not in the doldrums, but they're certainly not. Oregon State or Washington State or Cal and Stanford, they don't fall into that category. So yeah, they're finding out now, that all that money that was coming in so easily for them, they can really thank USC for. And when USC bolted, they became exceedingly vulnerable, and they failed to understand that. To me, that's just a lack of leadership on the part of those schools when it comes to what athletics is worth and how you should treat the money that you make from athletics as it relates to the long-term future of the institution. But you're right. I mean, there's no denying the Big 12 had a football environment and an atmosphere in it that the Pac-12 did not have, does not have, may never have. And even though they don't have schools that traditionally get a lot of eyeballs to television sets, they present a product where it's obvious that the schools care and the conference cares. And so then here they are now. I mean, think about it. Colorado, for all that they don't deliver in terms of product, I mean, their team barely won games last year, but, they deliver the Denver market, which is great for the Big 12. I mean, great. And it's one of the reasons, along with Deion, that they come in guns a-blazing with a lot of heat and a lot of interest for people to watch games involving the Colorado Buffaloes.
Tim, I cannot imagine college football in the future, whether it's in 2, 5, or 7 years, that doesn't include a chance for Washington and Oregon to compete for a national title. But because of the news of this week and last week, and then there was a story about the Big Ten has kind of had this committee looking at what they're going to do. I think they've already vetted Washington and Oregon. What's going to happen with them, in your opinion?
I think they're going to wind up in the Big Ten. I do. I'll go back again. I said that this would bring a chain of events. Dominoes would fall, and that you'd see the corner schools. You'd see Arizona State, Utah, follow Colorado. I still believe that'll happen. Now, I don't know that it'll happen this year. It could. I mean, it could. But I definitely believe that with the Big Ten now actively vetting those schools, Washington and Oregon, then what's left? That's now if you're Washington State and you're Oregon State, you're getting in touch with people at Fresno and San Diego State, finding out if they can form an alliance to bolster and make the Mountain West a bigger and better and more viable conference. San Diego State, had that letter, then turned the letter back in. Apparently had to pay, up to $17 million, not all at once, but over a period of time to win their way back in the Mountain West when they knew the Pac-12 wasn't ready yet, that they had no TV deal. That's another sidebar story that's been taking place. So, I definitely believe that the wheels have now turned to a point where the Pac-12 is in deep, deep trouble. Here, the issue is this, fellas. If you are the athletic director or the president of a major university, you're probably, David, my age or your age or older. Okay? And when you go back to your board of supervisors, board of regions, whatever you want to call them, and say, okay, here's the TV deal that George Kliavkov's given us. It's Apple-centric. Okay? Well, if you're 60-plus years old and you're telling me that you're not going to be on Fox, you're not going to be on ESPN, you're not going to be on NBC, you're not going to be on CBS, you're going to be on Apple TV, that doesn't register with your people. It just doesn't. Now, I know digital television is the future, and a lot of networks clearly have invested heavily into it. ESPN's heavily invested, much more so than Fox, but I mean, there's no doubt there's a place for it. We found that out last year with the NFL on Thursday nights. But what else did we find out from that experience on Thursday nights in the NFL? They got about half as many viewers on those games as they did when they were on Fox or on CBS on Thursday nights. You might get the money, but you may not get the exposure. And in this case, I think for the Pac-12, it's a combination of both. You're not getting nearly as much exposure, and your money is based on what they're telling you is incentive-based. Oh, it could be this if we can prove we've got that many people watching. You think those athletic directors and presidents want to go in and talk about, well, we might get this and we could get that, but we're not sure if we're getting even this. That doesn't go well with your leadership. in a major institution. Not when you're accustomed to getting big-time checks, rolling up to the game and going into your suite, knowing you can turn on the monitor, and your games are either going to be on Fox, FS1, ABC, ESPN, The Deuce, or any other network that you have been getting traditionally on network television or cable television.
How about the Apple Plus? Brett McMurphy had this story today that Apple Plus basically said you have until Friday, or they're going to pull the offer.
I can believe that.
Can you
believe that?
Yeah, I could too. But can you imagine what if they knew that? What if Kliavkoff knew that like 2 months ago, but then only gave up the details Tuesday of this week?
Well, that might have been the plan, to have them backed into a corner so that they would have really no other option. But the truth is, if due diligence has been practiced by these presidents and these athletic directors, and I believe that it has, then they know they've got options, and they are exercising those options as we speak. Look, I've met George, and I like him. I think he's a good man, but he just got outplayed big time by Yormark. And, this notion, well, we're going to do our TV deal later. Why? Because you thought the economy was going to get better? The economy got worse. Probably the smartest thing Yormark did was cut his deal when he did, because he knew that there was, after all the money spent by ESPN on the SEC, all the money spent by Fox on the Big Ten, there was only so much to go after. There was only so much money in that right fee bank, so to speak. And he went in and tapped the market, and he got out ahead of the Pac-12. He did his deal a year early. And once that money was spent, then the Pac-12 was in a world of hurt. And Kliavkoff was thinking, I don't know, maybe there was going to be a sudden change in our nation's economy and the buying market would be different. No, it's not. I mean, television is not like, we're just like anybody else. The market is soft. Budget cuts are happening across the board. Major layoffs of some premier talent is taking place at ESPN. It's being well documented. You got to be asleep at the switch if you don't see that. And that's what I think happened to the Pac-12.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised they didn't, especially considering that two of their schools are right there in Silicon Valley, didn't understand that when big corporations have problems in other realms that may not have anything to do with sports, all the money's in the same big pot, so when it comes to prioritizing things, the Pac-12 getting a TV deal is probably not as important to Disney as figuring out all of the things that have hit the wall across the board, not just ESPN, but across the board. And that's another thing that kind of surprised me is that, look, none of those things are the Pac-12's fault. That the actors and the writers are on strike, and that's one thing they have to deal with. That, streaming services exploded with content, and most of it didn't pay off. That's not their fault. But you still have to read the tea leaves a little bit better.
Yeah, absolutely. And, in our business, and that's, the sports television business now is a big, big deal because more people are tuning in to network television. I get such a kick out of fans when they call in, and you hear it from time to time on radio shows and whatnot, and they'll say, my God, it's just a disaster what's going on. It's awful. And don't you think pretty soon we're going to have to be paying for all these games? And I'm like, wait a minute. Have you not checked your allocation of funds that have been going to cable television since the subscriber fees you've been paying for ESPN all these years? Have you not checked that out? People think that, when they're watching their cable television that they're getting this stuff for free, and they're not. They're not. They haven't been for a long time. But, it's just, no, it's not a disaster. It's getting games on, and there's, talk that ESPN may be free and if Disney does downsize and they sell, and that's their business, we'll see what happens. But that maybe in the future that they'll be separate of the rest of the cable channels that they have. That may be the case. Maybe there's time to do that. I don't know. It's their business, not mine. But look, the good news here, and I've said this for a long time, is that network television is going further and further away from dramatic programming. And this is the issue that they have out in Hollywood now. All the great shows that people are watching, even people my age, they're watching them on Peacock. They're watching them on Paramount Plus. They're watching them on Prime Video. They're watching them on Netflix. They're not watching the garbage that's on network television anymore. They're not. So what is network television doing? They're putting more games on in prime time. Okay? They are. And Fox does more of it than anybody. All right? We have what I think maybe is Tim Allen's show still on? I'm not sure.
No.
If it is, it's probably the only one anybody watches on Fox now. Okay? What everybody's watching on Fox is World Cup, Major League Baseball, the NFL, college football, college basketball. That's what's on. That's where they're taking their product. They're putting it on Big Five. And eyeballs are following. And because they're not heavily invested into the digital world, they really don't have to. They don't have a nut to cover the same as Disney does, or as Viacom does, or other companies, Time Warner, any of those that recently sold. I think Time Warner recently sold, but still, it's been a smart business move by the people I work for to do what they've done. Basically, Fox is in the news business with its cable news, and it's in the sports business with its over-the-air network. That's what Fox is. And those games are available to people for free. And I still think all the great championship games and the deals you see done from college football playoff, the NCAA tournament, by and large, those games are going to be there for people to see on over-the-air networks for a while. But when people complain about, oh, my God, we're going to have to pay more for this, you're already paying. And you've been paying for quite some time. You just don't look at it that way because you've been doing it for so long. You're numb to the idea of, oh, that's the cable bill.
Well, all streaming really did, like ESPN Plus, was find a way for you to get to pay per pay-per-view every week, as opposed to once in a while when it built up.
Exactly, and their idea was to get people accustomed to doing that, and in truth, that meant they were going to take a loss, and they have taken some serious losses because of the investment they made into that. But they really believe, and in time, it will be very, very good for them. I don't think there's any question that the future is in streaming. There's no doubt about that. I'm not trying to throw streaming under the bus at all. I think that there's a great future for it. But right now, if you're the Pac-12 and you're trying to sell streaming as your main girl, that this is your primary carrier, versus Fox and ESPN, which is what the Big 12 has, I'm sorry. You're not ready for prime time coming with an offer like that.
Yeah, it's been a disaster. And some things worked against him, but wouldn't you say this is a self-inflicted wound or maybe worse for the Pac-12?
Yeah, it's definitely self-inflicted. And the signs of this happening, I think, were there for all of us to see during COVID, that their presidents and their leadership was not, they were asleep at the wheel during that. They almost let that season get entirely by them. What was it? The Pac-12 champion that year was Oregon. They went 3-2, I think. Mm-hmm. If I remember correctly, they beat USC in the Pac-12 title game. They were asleep at the wheel during that. And since that particular time, and everybody took a bath during the COVID year. Everybody lost money. And that's the other thing. The networks were cutting budgets, and, since that happened, what have you seen? You've seen more games being done with announcers, not at the games, but in a studio somewhere. All that is a byproduct of the financial strain from a production standpoint the networks were put in with the money going out for rights fees and having to deal with COVID and all that COVID brought on everyone from a travel standpoint, from a personnel standpoint. How do we manage to get this season in? And, college football's credit, especially I think the SEC and the Big 12, those two leagues helped get us through 2020. But it wasn't without a lot of painstaking work and a lot of lost revenue. There was plenty of both.
Tim, can you give us any insight into what Florida State and any other ACC team strategy might be to get out of a 12 to 13 year grant of rights?
Yeah, I listen. Florida State president at least was being candid and he was being transparent, and I applaud him. But what the hell is he going to do? I mean, he signed a grant of rights that is very costly. I don't know how you get out of that. I mean, I really don't. The only out. We were talking about the Pac-12 situation. Someone wrote a column recently. It might have been in the Athletic. Could have been Stu Mandel, and maybe because he's a Pac-12 guy and that went to Northwestern, and he follows Cal closely because he's out in Berkeley. And I like Stu. I don't always agree with him, but I like him. I know he cares about college football. He seems to think that possibly the what's left of the Pac-12 could strike a deal with Jim Phillips and the ACC to help bolster the payout from ESPN so that they could at least rival what the Big 12 is making in the future. And it sounds like a reasonable idea, but I just don't know, again, as you were mentioning, fellas, that the mission of every university is different. And the mission of the schools in the ACC may not match up at all with those left over in the Pac-12. You know, politics are different along the Atlantic seaboard, and especially in the southern sphere of the Atlantic seaboard, from that of Silicon Valley and the state of Washington. Okay, those are states that are far, far apart.
Tim, thank you for your time, but I want to get to your top 10. I saw that it was released.
Yeah.
It's always something that some people like want to go and slam their head between a door and a wall. But here's what we said. We mentioned it earlier, and we have it up on the screen. What I love about it is it's not just falling into place. Like, you know what? It's nice to be a little bit unique. Not that there aren't some dogs right there at the beginning, but it's to me, I'm not going to say it doesn't make sense because I don't know, but you want to go through your top 10?
Well, let me just, again, I have to remind people of this all the time. It's like having to remind fans that college football is not run by the NCAA, okay? You know, NCAA, I'm like, no, they don't. They lost the Supreme Court ruling in 1984. That's why the College Football Association was born. It's why the networks make deals with conferences and not with the NCAA. All that people forget. People always forget, David. When I put out this top 10, I started it when I had my own show, and I kept doing it after I stopped doing my own show. Feinbaum had me do it, and now I did it on Crane and Company yesterday. I really like Jake. They do a nice job with their show each morning on Daily Wire. But my poll is not a starting grid. Okay, it's not going to look like any other poll because I'm not projecting where teams deserve to start the season. I mean, all these polls you look at, in USA Today, Lindy's, name the top 10 that you look at. Okay, 24/7 this and all that. Okay, they all put out polls based on where they think teams should start the season ranked. Okay. And look, television buys into it because the networks use those rankings to help promote it. So, I mean, look, we're guilty of using it. So that's just the nature historically of college football. My poll is the antichrist of that. Mine is where teams finish. I'm projecting with my poll where I believe teams will finish. In other words, 1 through 4 are going to be in the playoffs. All right. But that doesn't mean that all 4 will have won their conferences. For example, a guy wrote today on some website, I presume Brando thinks LSU is going to win the SEC championship or that they'll play for the SEC championship against Georgia. That's not true. I never said that. I believe LSU could very easily lose to Alabama in Tuscaloosa. Okay? And then Alabama could get absolutely hammered by Georgia in the SEC championship, and that could be Alabama's second loss. Well, if that's Alabama's second loss, and LSU's had a great year, they only lost the 1 game in Tuscaloosa, and they beat Florida State to open their year, that's a non-conference game they don't have to play. I mean, that's a non-conference game they don't have to play, and they're playing it in the state of Florida. Then it's reasonable to assume that LSU could jump into the college football playoff in the 4 spot and not even play for the SEC title. Hell, Alabama did that one year. They played in the BCS in a rematch with LSU when they didn't even play in the conference championship game. It was LSU and Georgia that played in that game, and yet Alabama got the rematch against LSU for the national title when Oklahoma State lost that Thursday night game to Iowa State. Remember that? I mean, that happened in 2011.
Yep.
So we've seen this thing before. It's happened before. It should be understood that when you see my 4 teams, it doesn't mean that all 4 won their league or that if they even played for the league championship. Tulane, I've got at number 10 because I believe Tulane is the best team outside the so-called Power 5. Even with the losses, they lost their great running back and quarterback. They've got a great recruiting class coming in. I think they're going to win the American again. And by the way, when you win that league, that means you've played some really good teams. They'll have to beat UTSA, which I believe is another great team. Okay, I think Jeff Tramer's got a hell of a team. They're in my group of teams just out. I've got UTSA as one of those teams. I think UTSA can beat Houston to open the season. I believe that in Houston. So, you know, I'm not going to go with what everybody else does. My top 10 is the way I believe they will finish the season, not where they deserve to be on a starting grid because of their damn brand names. Okay, it's about time, fellas, that people realize there are 133 Division I college football programs in this country, and by God, I am not going to diminish the play of those teams that are outside the Power 5. As long as I'm talking college football, you can rest assured that whether it's Tulane or it's UCF or it's Cincinnati or it's even Kansas State out of the Big 12. Some people have problems with me picking Kansas State. Why on earth would you have a problem with me picking Kansas State? Last year I picked Baylor. I was wrong. Baylor wasn't the team from the Big 12. It was TCU. But some team like that is always going to make a run. And this year I believe Kansas State will return enough, and Kleiman's a good enough coach. And, yeah, I think they'll beat Texas at Texas. Why the hell does Texas automatically get put at the top every year or near the top every year? Because they're Texas? So what? You think they'll get through the Big 12 unscathed this year with the target they're going to carry on their backs? Forget about it. Kansas State is a team that's worthy of being number 7 in the country. And I believe at the end, they'll find their way to number 7.
Well, Tim, the rule on Texas is it was a papal edict a very long time ago. So, you know.
Well, it's like the guy just said, he's sitting here, Brando has disdain for the university. No, I don't have disdain for the university. The facts are what the facts are. They've not won anything since 2009. Okay? They've had 3 losing seasons in a handful of years, and every summer, all of a sudden, they skyrocket back to the top of the preseason rankings. Sorry, I watch college football. Other people with these rankings don't. That's obvious.
Oh, the chat room is just on fire. I mean, from they love it to having, like, Tim finally is someone with common sense. And then there's others, of course, which is part of being in broadcasting as well. Man,
isn't that the truth?
We love the segment, Tim. Thank you very much. How's your golf game?
Well, you know what? I'm getting in as many as I can because I'm going next week to St. Jude. I'm going to play in the Celeb Am and Pro-Am at the St. Jude World Golf Association get-together. It's such a blast, and can't wait to get back. I'm going to play the great course in Colliersville, too. That's where the Celebrity Am is going to take place. And so I'm my home course is closed this week. They had to punch the greens, but I went out and hit some balls at another place today, and I'll go back out again tomorrow. I'm going to try to at least drive for show in front of the folks when I'm in Memphis, because there's nothing worse than getting in front of people and hitting yanks and shanks.
Oh, I know.
You can't do that. You got to at least somewhere, as Bing Crosby once said in a beautiful song, right down the middle. I'm going to try to get it right down the middle at least on the gallery hole. You know,
I played in a Pro-Am back in the day in Tyler. It was the Eisenhower Golf Classic in between the Nelson and Colonial. And for 1 year, I was asked by the way, a former Arizona State president, George Ham, who was at UT Tyler. He said, we want you to be on a team. And I was scared to death. I'm pretty good, you know, like right now, but I was a little bit nervous. And I'll never forget, somebody gave me, one of the pros I'd done an interview with the night before, this big gala. He said, don't hit your driver. I said, why not? He goes, hit the club that you know you're going to get airborne. Not that you won't, but airborne and straighter. And I hit my 3-wood, and I just had this little draw down the middle and almost peed in my pants. I was so happy. I was so happy. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And by the way, unless they got a shot tracer on you, they don't know how far it went.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Thank you, sir. Appreciate your time. Fun times.
All right, fellas.
Tim Brando, Fox Sports with us. Appreciate the times he's given us to be a part of the show.
So you know how